Now we're joined by Stephen Barrett, the barrister, the writer for The Spectator, and the man who got famous recently by going on TV and exposing the truth about the EU law's removal. Obviously, the government have been claiming that it's almost impossible to do that. But Stephen went on TV and said, well, if you have a good law firm, you can actually go through them all and civil service. So welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I've just got back from quite a long journey back from Bournemouth, and I'm a single dad with a small child, so I'm doing great.
Brilliant. So yeah, obviously you got famous by going on TV and telling the truth about the legal aspects of this battle. As what we've heard recently is, well, to some people it seems like a U-turn on or Brexit betrayal on the promise to either remove or amend these 4,000-ish laws that we have that is still in our statute book from the European Union. Now they're saying that we're just going to assume that they're all going to stay, but we're going to go through them the other way around. So we might remove like 600, but not all of them. So what are your thoughts on this? What's going on?
Yes, well, so I only do the law, and I've been doing that for 3 years in public, and I find it increasingly comforting because it means I get to not care. So I don't care about any of this. All I care about is getting the law right. Now, a very famous and well-respected legal publisher estimated or calculated in 2017, so that's 6 years ago, that actually the EU had made or had its hand in 52,741 laws. Now, that number only got bigger until we eventually Brexited. And what then happened during the Brexit process was there was a clear policy angle by someone to make divergence as hard as possible. So the importance of EU courts was elevated well above our own. And doesn't fit well with our normal structure, and the normal supremacy and system of laws were not restored. They are going to be restored, or say they're going to be restored by this bill. But the other thing that the bill said was, look, we're going to get rid of the really low-hanging fruit, not the 52,000 or 53,000, who goodness knows how many there are now, not the major stuff that would be major policy decisions, but we're just going to clear out a lot of the dross. And when I say dross, there is an international standard in your ports to have a fitting so that ships can receive diesel oil that ships need. Now, that is set by an international body. If you want to, you can be the one country in the world that doesn't do that. I mean, we all know what would happen to how often ships came to visit you if you did do that. But, you know, in theory, the EU made that law in our country. And in theory, by getting rid of it, you know, we're at some terrible risk. But it seems obvious to me that we would simply follow the international standard. And that happens quite a lot on sort of product specifications that have happened. The 4,000 as they became are not in any way tricky. And the idea of going through them and reviewing them and putting them into 3 piles marked completely useless, probably useless, oh, Minister, you might want to have a think about this.
Right.
Was what I said is not a tricky task. And it's not a tricky task.
So these are not the ones that would affect international trade. These are not the big international obligation in terms of if you remove them, then they're not going to let you in Germany, for example.
No, they're not big in any way. They're not. Look, I mean, given your,
are they like the bendy bananas, those sort of stuff?
Well, they're even more boring, even more pointless. The ones that are relevant in that pile, I suggest are so glaringly, obviously relevant that even the dimmest minister wouldn't miss them if the sift actually went through. But what has happened that is it calls into question, really, the civil service, is that they've simply taken the line that we can't do this. Right. We can't. It's impossible to review 4,000 pieces of secondary legislation, hardly any of which is in any way interesting, and we can't do it in a year. And I'm speaking out about that because I wouldn't. I mean, if my clients come to me, and I have to tell them how long a piece of work, they say we want this piece of work. And then I have to say, well, it will take this many hours and this many days. And if I suddenly said, oh, it's going to take 100 years and I'll need 1,000 extra staff, they would sort of go, thank you very much, Mr. Barrett. We're just going to move down the road to your opponent. We're just going to instruct, your competitor because
yeah. So it seems like
what on earth you on about? But the ministers don't have a competitor. The ministers only have the civil service, and the civil service has been holding this line. Now, that won't be everybody in the civil service, because there are highly capable lawyers in the civil service. I've met them, I've worked with them, and they won't be holding this line because it's not a line that you can plausibly hold. But somebody is holding this line. Somebody is telling ministers this is technically impossible, and frankly embarrassing the competence of the rest of the civil service. He's basically saying, whoever this person is, this imaginary person, and by the way, I always call imaginary people Barry, but so whoever this Barry the civil servant is, he's basically going, minister, oh, and we can't possibly do it. We're so rubbish. We're so... That's really mean to the rest of the civil service.
Not to exaggerate the situation, but it's one of those situations where I kind of encourage or would try to have more whistleblowing as a concept, because I feel like there will be, there are a few good civil servants and lawyers in there. They're just going home after work and just being frustrated. They don't have the power. They don't feel the power to actually come out to speak out or tell someone. So that's one issue. But I want to lastly kind of focus on the other parts of it, which is Alistair Campbell. Alistair Campbell was interviewed recently on the Newsnight, I believe, and he claimed that from day one, all these EU laws, it was by choice. We had the choice as a country and parliament whether to implement or not. What's your view on that? Because clearly that's not true, right?
Yes, that's not true. So Alistair Campbell got very angry and aggressive. I think he's apologised for his behaviour, although
not to the guest though, but to.
I often find his apologies tricky to follow. But I believe he's apologised. The assertion is simply false. It is wrong. The EU makes direct laws in nation states, in member states, and it makes sort of partially indirect laws by way of directive. But it will tell you when it wants you to implement the directive by, and it will. And if you change the directive in a way they don't like, they will tell you, and the Commission will enforce it. So the idea that it's somehow voluntary is absurd. I mean, that is simply not a statement that is in any way true. And I've got many friends who are I'll confess to you, I don't have many friends. I've got a couple who are EU lawyers inside the UK. I'm not completely hated, but I've got an awful lot on the continent, because of course to them, they again don't really care about our politics. They only care about them. To them, it would be a risible statement to say that we were ever able to say no to an EU law. No, your choice is to implement the law or to leave. That is the legal choice. The supremacy of EU law has been established for a very long time. In fact, I've bored an awful lot of people with other member states of the EU who have denied supremacy. And I've told them off in the press. I've said they should be doing this because EU law is supreme. And you get these sort of Twitter warriors who are there, oh, we could definitely just ignore EU law. It's like, no, you can't. It makes sense. It's this can't question, which is really, really important, because that goes to something that I fundamentally represent. Law will always be about can and can't, and politics will always be about should. And it's really, really important that can't stays small. It has to be in a narrow area. It has to be controlled. It's not for lawyers to start going, oh, you can't do that. You can't do that. Us picking arbitrarily what you can do. Maya, you can't wear a green t-shirt. You have to wear a blue one. Why? Well, because I wrote it in regulations somewhere. This is not what's happening. And the myth of EU membership, or the thing that people didn't understand during the Brexit debate, or the thing that was actively denied to the people during the Brexit debate, because I do remember Nick Clegg standing up and saying, oh, they hardly make any laws.
Yes, I remember.
And that again is a statement which I think is, as a matter of law, in no way plausible.
When Nick Clegg was not the best to even predict the future, he claimed that there's no such thing as an idea for an EU army or the EU defense union. Well, that was wrong.
Yeah, it is. And again, I go back to my friends inside the EU who would just be horrified at these statements. Like, why are you denying what we'd quite like you to do? To them, it is completely alien. But this has been the nature of the British debate, and I've just sailed into it by being honest about the law. And it is not for us, and that the reason is it is simply not for lawyers to tell the people what to believe and what to choose and what to want. It simply isn't.
So what you're saying is that even the lawyers who might have been obviously Remainers at the time, so became political during the campaign, not only that they alienated a chunk of the British population because they thought they're against them, they're also alienated the European Union because the EU was saying, you're undermining what we actually want to do. We want to do more. You're claiming that we're not doing anything, Brussels. So it's brilliant.
Well, it's completely it's the oddity of where our politics got to. It sort of became post-truth politics, and it's simply. I will only intervene when statements that are made. Can you see my dog active in the background? She's just desperate to become a star.
It's a bomb.
But I will only intervene when a statement is made that is so obviously false that I think an intervention needs to come in. Because you need to know what the law is. I mean, we had this in the House of Lords again recently. I think it was last week. It raised its ugly head. Members of the House of Lords were saying we can't break international law. Now that's not true.
Yeah.
We don't actually break international law. We ignore it.
Yes.
There's a whole big body of international law, so going back hundreds and thousands of years. We pick from that pool bits of international law we think are useful, and we put them in our law. And when they're in our law, we're good and we follow the rule of law and we don't break them.
Right.
Which, by the way, that's actually what Alistair Campbell was arguing we should do, because we take an EU law, we put it into our law, and we should follow the rule of law, so we have to follow EU directives. So the idea they're optional is a bit like, no, you're arguing we should break the rule of law. But that's what we do. We take them in, we pull them in, and they're inside our rules. And then if we unincorporate them, if Parliament breaks the treaty, if Parliament removes the act, the statutes, then off they float back into that land and away from us where we obey the rule of law.
It's absolutely chaotic. To refer with all these conversations, I might actually give you your own show on the channel, talk about the legal stuff. That would be fun. But I thank you so much, Stephen Barrett, for coming on the show. What is your Twitter handle so people know if they want to?
It is S Barrett Bar. I thought
Barrett,
that was neutral, non-political, and perfectly respectable.
If you want to follow the legal nerdy stuff, follow Stephen. Thank you so much for coming on the show. And guys, let's get back on.